Here, the forest pulsated with life as tall tree ferns lining the banks of a river attracted scores of hungry plant eaters. And where there was prey, danger was everywhere. It seems Deltadromeus wasn't the only carnivore that hunted here. Everywhere Serino and his team went, giant shark-like teeth kept cropping up. Somewhere out there, an unknown killer was lying in wait for the team.
Africa is a great frontier. I know of no other place that has as rich and as widely exposed the treasures of the past, and yet so little of it known.
Hunting for bones in the Sahara is like looking for a needle in a haystack the size of North America. After 8 weeks in the desert, the team was exhausted. The trip had been grueling, but also rewarding. And it wasn't over yet.
We still had a couple days left in the field. We moved to one of the last areas we had to look. This time I was the lucky one, and it was totally unpredictable. I saw an area of outcrop. I walked towards it, and I walked over and I saw in front of me a pile of bones, fragments.
Perched precariously on the edge of a steep outcrop, the team start to unearth Serino's chance discovery.
Look at this. Have you guys seen the teeth? This is incredible. 1, 2, 3. There's a replacing tooth here. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
We wouldn't have really had more than 14 teeth.
Mm-hmm. We got the whole jaw.
Serino had stumbled on what was to become one of the most important and terrifying dinosaurs that Africa had ever spawned. Finding it was one thing. Getting the half-a-ton slab of rock back to the truck was another. But the effort was worth it. In 1996, Paul Serino introduced the world to his new discovery. At 5 feet in length, its skull was not only the biggest, but the most complete ever found in Africa. It belonged to Carcharodontosaurus, meaning shark-toothed reptile. 50 feet of sinew on 2 powerful hind legs, it had unrivaled speed and acceleration. Its weapon of choice was its awesome jaw. Carcharodontosaurus was way ahead of the competition. Although it resembled a tyrannosaur, it was also one of a kind.
Africa shows how evolution really doesn't and can't operate to produce the same forms over time when you isolate them. Carcharodontosaurus, for example, a very large dinosaur in Africa, essentially reaching the same size as Tyrannosaurus, but from a totally different line of dinosaurs. That's an example of evolution in isolation.
And this isolation was to become absolute, as Africa's dinosaurs became cut off from each other, as well as from the rest of the world. In time, this would produce a collection of beasts unlike anywhere else on Earth. Life for the dinosaurs of Africa was always fierce, each competing to be top of the food chain. Because this position was so precarious, any subtle changes in the environment could have massive effects. A change took place in Africa that was enormous.
During the late Cretaceous, sea levels all over the world rose somewhat, and as a result, places like North America were split in two by shallow seas. This also happened in Africa, so northern Africa was separated somewhat from southern Africa, which means the animals in those two places were separated from each other as well.
Sea waters flooded in from east to west, splitting the continent in two. In the sea, some animals migrated between the two oceans, causing a dramatic mix of species. But on land, the African dinosaurs were now cut off from one another. For paleontologist Billy de Klerk, the Grahamstown Museum in South Africa, this isolation opened up yet another fascinating chapter in dinosaur evolution. In the southernmost region of South Africa lies a 1,000 square mile area known as the Kirkwood Formation. Here, the rocks preserve a record of life dating back to the Cretaceous period 135 million years ago.
Of course, the vegetation would have been marginally different. We didn't have, in those days, the succulent flowering plants around. We did have, though, big trees in the form of yellowwoods. Here's a fossil yellowwood. It's about 135 million-year-old rock now. And that type of tree is still growing here in southern Africa today. All of this tells us that Africa has remained stable over these millions of years until the present day.
Today, Africa is as wild and abandoned as it was 135 million years ago. Here, it is kill or be killed. Survival comes only to the fittest. Top of the food chain, a solitary meat eater stalks a docile plant eater, its unsuspecting prey, while the world's largest land animals graze in herds, much like huge sauropods had millions of years before. In the Shamwari Game Reserve, finding the bones of big dinosaurs is not uncommon. But a discovery here in 1997 hinted that Africa wasn't only populated by giants.
In South Africa, we have these little dinosaurs that are coming up now, which are totally different than anything else we've seen before, too. So we're just beginning to understand these animals, and chances are they're going to turn out to be just as weird and wonderful and bizarre as anything we found in North America.
In this rocky outcrop, Billy de Klerk found a creature that is unique to Africa.
Well, it's from these sediments that we have recently found a very, very important dinosaur here in South Africa. It's a small, meat-eating type dinosaur which is new to science and very well preserved, and we've called this little dinosaur Kirky.
Named after the Kirkwood Formation, where it was discovered, Kirky lived 135 million years ago. A swift, two-legged predator about the size of a chicken, it fed on small lizards and insects. But it cowered in the footsteps of its giant cousins. In the Age of Titans, survival for a dinosaur the size of Kirky could have been tricky. But Billy de Klerk thinks big is not always better. For Kirky, life on the forest floor was a banquet.
Kirky would have taken advantage of the available food supply at the time, and while we were preparing the specimen, we found some lizard material in its gut area, perhaps its last lunch. It was also an opportunistic feeder. It would have scavenged on occasion, and therefore Kirky really was quite content with its food supply. Didn't really need to become a very large dinosaur.
Two dinosaurs from two different worlds, locked in isolation. Why creatures like Kirky were so small, whilst others like Carcharodontosaurus were so big, remains unknown. But scientists are certain the answer lies somewhere in Africa.
We're learning that Africa, of course, as we should have expected, is a very complex place. The north of Africa is different from the southern part of Africa, and these two are in turn different from Madagascar, which just lies off the southeast coast.
Madagascar is an island of magic and mystery. Here, things are not what they seem. 75 million years ago, this world was turned upside down. island of Madagascar is the land that time forgot. An island of animal misfits. Here, what's common is unusual and often outlandish. These animals and plants are living proof that in isolation, anything can happen.
Islands often are refuges. They're nature's game parks. If you want to go back 30 million years to our own human history, you go to the island of Madagascar, because there are very primitive monkey-like things called lemurs. They're gone everywhere else. But that island served to insulate the lemurs from any new predator.
Like lemurs, most of the creatures that live on Madagascar are found nowhere else on Earth. In 1996, a team of scientists came here hoping that 75 million years ago, Madagascar's dinosaurs were also unique. Joining team leader Dave Krause of the State University of New York is Kathy Forrester, a specialist in prehistoric birds, and paleontologist Scott Sampson. What lured them here is Madagascar's unique geologic history. Before it became an island, it was wedged between 3 continents.
Madagascar was attached to Africa, and it split away from Africa, in about 150 million years ago or so. Although it was still attached at the time to India, and India was still attached to Antarctica, which in turn was attached to South America. Later on in time, in the Cretaceous, 80 million years ago, India broke away from Madagascar, so for the first time, Madagascar was isolated, and all the animals and plants on Madagascar were isolated as well.
Today it lies 300 miles off the southeast coast of Africa, the 4th largest island in the world. It covers an area greater than California and Washington state combined. The team are in the northeast corner of the island, near the town of Majunga. The chances of finding dinosaur bones are high. The ground here is littered with fossils. Already, Scott Sampson has made a discovery.
In some ways, this is about as good as it gets, because we have multiple bones together, eroding out of a hill. There is very little in the way of other bones down the hill, so it means that we're not here too late, probably. The skeleton is likely in the hill rather than down the hill. And there's, as you can see, there's not much dirt above the bones here, so it makes it easy for us to get our picks and shovels in here and find out if there's actually a dinosaur buried in this hill.
In no time, the team zeroed in on a number of promising sites and have started uncovering large bones. But these 2 tiny brown flecks found by Kathy Forrester may be the most significant find of the day.
We think we might have at least the wing of a bird in here, and possibly the whole bird. We're not sure. We're going to take this out, bring it back to the lab, and let them tell us.
Fossils of ancient birds are extremely rare and almost unheard of in the southern hemisphere. The first and most famous was discovered in southern Germany in 1861. Called Archaeopteryx, meaning ancient wing, it was half dinosaur, half bird. The earliest example of a creature with a feathered wing, it was a fossil caught in the act of evolution.
Since the middle of the last century, when the Archaeopteryx was first described, it's occupied this unique position as the oldest and most primitive bird. In recent years, there's been a number of discoveries, including the one we've made on Madagascar, which has challenged Archaeopteryx in this position. And we're now starting to shed some light on this very dimly lit area, very important area of evolutionary history.
By 1998, Kathy Forrester finally pieced together her ancient bird. Called Rhehonavis, meaning menacing bird, it lived 70 million years ago during the late Cretaceous. A small predator about the size of a crow, it had a long reptilian tail and a skull lined with sharp serrated teeth.
We found it had a very long tail, which was pretty unusual. And we prepared down both legs, and we found at the end of the left leg this beautiful foot.
At the end of its foot was a large sickle-shaped